The eviction notice was pink. Why did landlords always choose pink, as if pastel softness could cushion the brutality of homelessness? Rowan Marlowe sat on the third-floor landing of the apartment building, the paper trembling in her hands, not from fear, but from the September wind gusting through the broken hallway window. Charleston, West Virginia sprawled below a city built on coal money that had long since dried up, leaving only rust and regret. She folded the notice into smaller and smaller squares until it became a hard little cube of failure she could fit in her palm. Wren was 5 years old, red-haired like her mother, sitting 3 steps down with a broken crayon and a torn coloring book. The child hummed something tuneless, oblivious to the mathematics of desperation. 4 months since the packaging plant closed. 18 job applications, 0 callbacks. $178 in the checking account. 5 days until that ran out. The building superintendent had been apologetic in that careful way people used when they knew you had no options. 3 months overdue, legal obligation, nothing personal. Rowan had nodded through it all, her face a mask she'd learned to wear in foster care. When caseworkers explained why this placement hadn't worked out, why that family had changed their minds. You learned early that your presence was always temporary, always conditional. Wren looked up, crayon paused mid-stroke. Mama, when we get our castle? The question landed like a stone in still water. Rowan had told her daughter stories at night, fairy tales about princesses who lived in stone towers, about magic and redemption and happy endings. Lies mostly, but what else did you give a child when reality offered nothing but gray walls and government cheese? Soon, little bird, real soon. The postal truck's engine rumbled up the street, and Rowan watched it with the blank disinterest of someone who expected nothing from the world. Bills came in the mail, eviction notices, final warnings from creditors who hadn't yet realized she had nothing left to take. But the postal worker climbed the stairs, actually climbed 3 flights instead of stuffing the mailbox, and carried a package the size of a shoebox. Rowan Marlowe, she nodded, too surprised to speak. Signature required. Certified from, he squinted at the label, Vaughn and Associates, Ashford, Hollow. The name meant nothing. She signed anyway, her handwriting cramped and childish, because nobody in foster care had cared enough to teach her cursive properly. The package was heavier than it looked, wrapped in brown paper and excessive amounts of packing tape. The return address was embossed in old-fashioned lettering, the kind that suggested wood-paneled offices and leather-bound law books. Wren abandoned her coloring book, drawn by the mystery. What is it? Don't know yet, bird. The tape fought her for 3 minutes before she found a loose edge and tore it free. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was an iron key, not modern stamped metal, but hand-forged heavy, the bow decorated with Celtic knotwork that caught the thin hallway light. Beneath it, a letter on cream-colored paper, the letterhead reading, Vaughn and Associates Estate Law, in embossed gold. And at the very bottom, a photograph. The photograph was black and white edges softened by age. A man stood before a stone gate, elderly, but not frail, his face carved by weather and time into something resembling the mountains behind him. His eyes were pale, even in monochrome, fixed on the camera with an intensity that felt like recognition. On the back, handwriting and fountain pen, for Rowan and Wren, when you come home at last, FT. FT. The letter was formal type, signed by someone named Alistair Vaughn, who claimed to be handling the estate of Franklin J. Thorne, deceased March 15, 2023. The language was dense with legal terminology, bequests and codicils and testamentary instruments, but certain phrases cut through the fog: sole heir, 287 acres, conditions of inheritance, your presence required. Rowan read it 3 times. On the 4th reading, Wren leaned against her shoulder, small fingers tracing the Celtic pattern on the key. Is that our castle's key? The question shouldn't have hurt, but it did. Rowan's throat tightened around words she didn't have. She pulled out her phone screen, cracked battery at 14% because the charger cable was held together with electrical tape, and searched Franklin Thorne Ashford Hollow obituary. The results loaded in fragments, hampered by the building's weak Wi-Fi. An obituary from the Ashford Hollow Gazette, March 2023. Franklin James Thorne, 77, passed peacefully at Mercy General Hospital, survived by no immediate family. Prominent landowner, 287-acre mountain property, known locally as Thorne Estate. Services private. In lieu of flowers, donations to the Appalachian Land Trust. Rowan clicked another link. A forum post from April 2023, someone asking if anyone knew who'd inherited old Frank's place. Responses speculated distant cousin, state seizure, that developer who'd been circling. One comment made her stomach drop, heard it's going to court. Frank left weird conditions. Somebody's fighting for it. Court. Fighting. Conditions. She looked at the key again, really looked at it. This wasn't a symbolic gesture or a sentimental keepsake. This was a test. And if she'd learned anything in 28 years of temporary homes and broken promises, it was that nobody gave you something for nothing. There was always a price. The bus from Charleston to Ashford Hollow cost $63 one way. She had 178 total. No return ticket, no safety net, no backup plan. Wren was watching her with those impossibly clear green eyes, waiting for an answer about castles and keys and happy endings. Rowan went inside, threw their lives into 2 backpacks, closed Wren's stuffed rabbit to the photograph, the key, her last pay stub to prove she'd once been employed. Everything else, the thrift store furniture, the mismatched dishes, the broken dreams she left for the landlord to dispose of. Let him keep the security deposit she'd never get back anyway. At the Greyhound station, she bought 2 one-way tickets and a bag of pretzels, because Wren hadn't eaten since breakfast. The bus was scheduled to depart at 2:15. They sat on plastic chairs bolted to the floor, surrounded by people who looked as displaced as Rowan felt. A man slept sitting up, his head lolling against the wall. A teenage girl sobbed into her phone in Spanish. An elderly woman clutched a Walmart bag to her chest like it contained something precious. Wren ate her pretzels slowly, making each one last, a habit she'd learned when food was uncertain. "Mama, are we going on an adventure?" The word adventure was too light for what they were doing. Fleeing maybe, gambling, grasping at straws while drowning. "Yeah, bird, like in the stories. We're going to find out about the key." "Will there be horses and chickens?" "Maybe. And a big house with lots of rooms." The picture showed a stone house. "Looks old, probably needs fixing up." Wren processed this with the optimism only children possessed. "I can help fix it. I'm very good at holding hammers." Despite everything, Rowan smiled. "You are. Best hammer holder I know." The bus pulled in 10 minutes late, diesel fumes mixing with autumn air. They climbed aboard, found seats near the back, where the engine noise was loudest, but the view was better. As Charleston receded through the grimy window, the river, the Capitol dome, the shuttered factories, Rowan felt the weight of leaving press against her chest. She'd been born here, raised in the system. Here had Wren here. It was the only home she'd known, however inadequate. But home was a place that wanted you. Charleston had made it clear she was surplus population. The highway cut through mountain country switchbacks and tunnels through rock valleys that held morning fog like secrets. October was coming, the trees already turning hickory, gold, oak, rust, maple flame. Wren pressed her nose to the window, narrating everything. "Mama, look at that barn. It's red, but not bright red, more like old red. Mama, there's cows. Mama, do mountains ever end?" Rowan let the child's voice wash over her, a lifeline against the rising panic. She kept touching the key in her jacket pocket, reassuring herself it was real. Metal didn't lie. Metal was evidence. Someone named Franklin Thorne had owned land and died and left something to a granddaughter he'd never met. Granddaughter. The word implied family, which implied belonging, which implied a history Rowan had never possessed. Her mother was a ghost named Colette who died in a car crash when Rowan was 6 months old. Foster care records said single mother, no known relatives, child placed in state custody. Nothing about a father. Nothing about grandparents. Nothing about anyone who'd looked for her or wanted her or cared. Except now, apparently someone had. The bus driver announced Ashford Hollow over the intercom with the enthusiasm of someone announcing a layover in purgatory. The town appeared gradually, first scattered houses, then a main street that looked frozen in 1950. Brick buildings with hand-painted signs. A diner called Temperance's Home Cooking. A hardware store with a going out of business banner that had faded to illegibility. A post office with an actual hitching post out front, though Rowan doubted anyone had tied a horse there in decades. 3 people got off the bus. Rowan, Wren, and a man in his 70s who immediately climbed into a waiting pickup truck and drove away without acknowledging anyone. The bus pulled out, leaving them standing on a cracked sidewalk beside a bench that said, "Ashford Hollow, founded 1889, Cole built this town." Wren's hand found Rowan's small and warm. "It's very quiet here." She was right. The silence had weight. No traffic sounds, no construction noise, no sirens or shouting or bass-heavy music from passing cars. Just wind in the trees and a dog barking somewhere distant. Rowan checked her phone. 2 bars of signal. The law office was on Main Street, according to the letter. She shouldered both backpacks and started walking. The townspeople who were out, and there weren't many, watched them pass with the careful neutrality mountain people reserve for outsiders. A woman sweeping a storefront paused mid-stroke. A man loading supplies into a truck followed them with his eyes. No one spoke. No one smiled. At the corner where a defunct gas station slouched toward collapse, an elderly man sat on an overturned bucket selling newspapers from a cardboard box. He was thin in the way old age made people's skin hanging loose on bones, but his eyes were sharp. When Rowan approached, those eyes widened slightly. "Excuse me, do you know where Vaughn and Associates is?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at her face like he was seeing something impossible. Finally, his voice creaked out, rough with disuse. "Lord have mercy, you got Colette's eyes." The name hit her like a fist. "You knew my mother." "Knew of her. Everybody did back when. She was Frank Thorne's girl." He paused, then seemed to reconsider whatever he'd been about to say. "You come about Frank's place. I got a letter from his lawyer. Best turn around, miss. That land's cursed. Always has been. Nothing but grief comes from those mountains." Wren pressed closer to Rowan's leg, suddenly uncertain. Rowan squeezed her daughter's hand. "We've come a long way. We're seeing the lawyer." The old man shook his head slowly, a gesture that managed to convey both warning and resignation. "Vaughn's office is 2 blocks up above the pharmacy. Can't miss it. Only building with lights still on most days." He returned to his newspapers, conversation over. They found the pharmacy, Ashford Drugs Est, 1923, and the narrow staircase beside it leading to a second floor. The stairs creaked under their weight, the wood worn smooth by a century of footsteps. At the top, a door with frosted glass and gold lettering, Vaughn and Associates Estate Law. Rowan knocked. "Come in," a voice called, cultured and aged. The office belonged to another era. Dark wood paneling, brass fixtures, bookshelves crammed with law volumes whose spines had faded to illegibility. Behind a massive oak desk sat a man who matched the space, early 70s, silver hair, swept back, wire-rimmed glasses, 3-piece suit in charcoal wool. He stood when they entered, and his face arranged itself into an expression of profound relief. "Miss Marlowe, I've been waiting for you for 3 years. 3 years, since Frank Thorne died. I'm Alistair Vaughn. Please sit. And this must be Wren, my daughter." Vaughn's eyes softened. "Of course, Frank would have been overjoyed to know about you, young lady." Wren, suddenly shy, hid behind Rowan's leg. Rowan sat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk, setting their backpacks on the floor. The office smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco, and something else, age maybe, or the accumulated weight of other people's legal troubles. Vaughn returned to his seat, opening a thick file folder that had Thorne Franklin J. written on the tab in neat handwriting. "I imagine you have questions." "I have about 1,000, starting with who Franklin Thorne was and why he left me anything." Frank, as everyone called him, was your grandfather. Your mother, Colette, was his only child. When she left in 1999, she was 19 and pregnant with you. Frank spent the next 20 years trying to find her. By the time he succeeded, Colette had already passed away in the car accident, and you'd been placed in foster care. The words hung in the air like dust motes in the afternoon light streaming through the office windows. Grandfather. Your grandfather. Rowan had never had a grandfather. She'd never had anyone. "Why didn't he?" Her voice cracked. She tried again. "Why didn't he come get me?" Vaughn's face showed genuine sorrow. "He tried. When he found you, you were 6 years old. He petitioned for custody. The state denied him. Too old, they said. Too isolated. Living alone on a mountain with no nearby schools or medical facilities. They deemed him unfit. He removed his glasses, cleaned them with a handkerchief. It destroyed him, but he never stopped watching over you. Never stopped hoping that one day you'd find your way home." Rowan's throat was too tight for words. Wren climbed into her lap, a warm, solid weight anchoring her to reality. Vaughn continued, his voice gentle but professional. "Frank passed away March 15th, 2023. He left a will with very specific instructions. The estate, 287 acres of land, the main house, 4 outbuildings, and all associated property goes to you, provided certain conditions are met." There it was, the catch. What conditions? Before we get to that, you should understand what you're inheriting. The property has been in the Thorne family since 1898. Frank's great-grandfather bought it with money earned working the coal mines. It's prime mountain land with timber water access and mineral rights that Frank retained even when coal companies came calling. The estimated value is, he consulted a document, $2.3 million. The number was so large it stopped meaning anything. Rowan had $115 left after the bus tickets. 2.3 million might as well have been 2 billion. "But there's a complication," Vaughn said. A man named Keaton Griggs, a real estate developer from Charleston, filed a lawsuit 3 months after Frank's death. He claims Frank was mentally incompetent when he wrote his will and that the estate should be sold at auction. Griggs had obtained a temporary court order designating himself as the property's caretaker until the legal dispute is resolved. Can he do that? He did do it. The hearing is scheduled for 18 days from now. If you don't appear and successfully contest his claim, the judge will likely rule in his favor and order the property sold. Griggs has already publicly stated he'll purchase it for $400,000, well below market value. 18 days. The panic that had been hovering at the edges of Rowan's consciousness rushed in like floodwater. What do I need to do? Vaughn pulled several documents from the file. First, establish your identity and relationship to Frank. That's straightforward. I have your birth certificate, which lists Colette Thorne as your mother, and DNA testing can confirm your lineage if necessary. Second, demonstrate that Frank was of sound mind when he executed his will. I have medical records and witness testimony that will prove that. Third, and this is where it becomes complex, you'll need to show the court that you intend to fulfill the conditions Frank set for your inheritance, which are, the actual conditions are detailed in the will's codicil. However, those pages appear to have been removed from the county clerk's file. Griggs had legal access to the documents during his caretaker inspections. I believe he removed them deliberately to prevent you from knowing what you needed to do. Wren was playing with the key, turning it over in her small hands, making the Celtic knotwork catch the light. Rowan watched her daughter thinking about castles and fairy tales and promises she'd made in the dark. You said you have the original will. Frank kept it locked in his study. I have a backup key, but Griggs also has access per the court order. I can't prevent him from entering the property. The key we received in the mail, what's it for? Vaughn's expression shifted, became something like wonder. Frank was very specific about that. The key opens a door in the oldest barn. He welded that door shut in 1997, right after Colette disappeared. He told me, and I quote, only Rowan can open it. Only when she brings her daughter home. I don't know what's behind that door. Frank wouldn't tell anyone. Rowan looked at the key in Wren's hands. Everything that matters, the old man from the forum had said, or maybe she was misremembering, conflating hope with reality. I need to see the property. Vaughn nodded, already reaching for his coat. I was hoping you'd say that. The drive took 30 minutes, winding up mountain roads that seemed designed to test brake systems and nerve. Vaughn drove a Lincoln Town Car from the 90s, maintained with the care of someone who believed in the permanence of good things. He pointed out landmarks as they climbed the turnoff to the old mine, closed since 2015. The overlook where teenagers went to drink. The creek that ran year-round, fed by mountain springs. Wren sat in the back seat, nose pressed to the window, her earlier shyness forgotten. Mama, the trees are so tall. Mama, I saw a deer. Mama, are those our mountains? Our mountains. The possessive pronoun felt both presumptuous and desperately necessary. The entrance to Thorne property was marked by stone pillars, each taller than a man, with Thorne 1898 carved into the capstones. The gate was open, hanging slightly crooked on hinges that needed oil. Beyond stretched a dirt road tunneling through oak and hickory, the canopy so dense it created a green twilight even in afternoon sun. They drove slowly, the car bouncing over ruts and rocks. A quarter-mile in the road opened into a clearing, and Rowan's breath caught. The house was stone, not wood. 3 stories of quarried granite, the blocks fitted so precisely mortar was barely visible. Gothic Revival architecture, she thought, though she didn't know how. She knew that narrow windows with pointed arches, a corner tower, steep gables. The roof was slate, missing tiles and patches. The porch wrapped around 2 sides, the boards gray with age but still solid. Ivy had claimed the east wall, climbing toward the tower windows. 4 outbuildings stood at various distances, 3 barns in faded red paint, 1 smaller structure that might have been a smokehouse. Beyond them, the land rolled away in waves of forest and meadow, rising toward peaks that held the first gold of autumn. Wren was out of the car before it fully stopped, running toward the house with her arms spread like wings. It is a castle. Rowan stood beside the car, paralyzed by the weight of it. This wasn't some fantasy from a story. This was real stone, real land, real history. And somewhere in this place, her mother had lived and grown up and gotten pregnant and run away into darkness. Vaughn approached quietly, his voice low. Frank maintained it until he went into the hospital. After his death, Griggs had the utilities shut off, claimed it was a safety issue. No electricity, no running water. But the structure's sound. Frank built to last. A black Ram truck came roaring up the road, engine deliberately loud, tires spitting gravel. It skidded to a stop 20 feet away, and a man climbed out with the aggressive casualness of someone used to owning every space he entered. Keaton Griggs was 48, but carried himself like someone younger, someone who'd never been told no. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark beard trimmed with precision, expensive suit that had no business in these mountains. His eyes swept over Rowan with the calculation of someone assessing livestock. "You must be Rowan. Bill mentioned you'd shown up." The familiarity using Vaughn's first name, assuming he had the right to know everything, grated immediately. Rowan kept her voice level. "And you're the man trying to steal my grandfather's land." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Strong words. I prefer to think I'm rescuing valuable property from legal limbo. Sweet little girl you have there. What's her name?" Wren had retreated to the porch steps, suddenly uncertain. "Don't talk to my daughter." Griggs raised his hands in mock surrender. "No offense intended. I'm just saying it's a shame to drag a kid into this mess." He pulled a folded check from his inside jacket pocket, held it out. $100,000. Cash out today, walk away clean. More money than you've ever seen, I'm guessing. The assumption in those words that she was poor and desperate and easily bought wasn't wrong, but it still felt like a slap. Rowan didn't take the check. "This land belonged to my grandfather. He left it to me. I'm not selling." "Your grandfather was 77 years old with a diagnosed heart condition. His mental capacity was questionable at best. The will was written under duress or confusion. No court's going to honor it." Vaughn stepped forward, his lawyer voice crisp. "Frank's medical records show no cognitive decline. He was examined by 3 separate physicians in the year before his death. All confirmed full mental capacity." Griggs ignored him, still focused on Rowan. "Let me explain something. This property's unsafe. Electrical systems from the 40s, well pumps broken, roof's got holes. You'd need $200,000 just to make it livable. You're a single mother with no visible means of support. How exactly are you planning to pay for repairs? Where's your daughter going to go to school? Nearest elementary is 20 miles down the mountain." Every point was valid. Every point was a knife between the ribs. "I'll figure it out. You'll freeze when winter comes. You'll starve when your money runs out. You'll realize I was doing you a favor." He tucked the check back into his pocket. "Offer drops $25,000 every week you waste fighting this." "Clock's ticking, Miss Marlowe." He drove away with the same aggressive speed, leaving dust and diesel fumes in his wake. Rowan stood in the sudden silence, shaking not from fear but from rage so pure it felt clarifying. Wren ran to her, wrapping small arms around her waist. "I don't like that man, Mama." "Me neither, Bird." Vaughn touched her shoulder gently. "He's trying to intimidate you. It's a tactic. Don't let it work." "He's right, though. I don't have money for repairs. I don't have I don't have—" She stopped, hearing the defeat in her own voice. "Show me inside." The front door was locked, but Vaughn had a key. The lock resisted rust and disuse, but finally surrendered. The door swung inward on hinges that shrieked. The interior was dark, all the curtains drawn, but enough light filtered through to reveal the bones of the space. A main hall with a wooden staircase curving upward, each step worn smooth in the center, from generations of footsteps. A parlor to the left, furniture covered in white sheets like sleeping ghosts. A dining room to the right, with a table that could seat 12. Everywhere dust lay thick as snow. Wren's footsteps echoed on the hardwood as she explored, pulling back sheets to reveal Victorian furniture, running her hands along banisters, peering into rooms that smelled of abandonment and time. Rowan walked slowly, touching walls, feeling the solidness of stone beneath her fingers. On the mantelpiece above the fireplace, photographs in tarnished silver frames, a young couple, formal and unsmiling in the fashion of the 1890s. A man in work clothes standing beside a coal car. A woman holding a baby, the baby grown into a child, then a teenager. The last photograph stopped her. A girl of 17 or 18, red hair, catching sunlight, green eyes bright with something like defiance. She stood in front of this very house, arms crossed, chin lifted. On the back, in faded ink, Colette Summer, 1900s. 1 year before Rowan was born. 1 year before everything fell apart. She touched the glass, her finger tracing her mother's face. They looked alike, same narrow chin, same high cheekbones, same way of standing, like they expected to have to defend themselves. Vaughn appeared beside her. Frank kept this room exactly as it was when Colette left. He couldn't bear to change it. "Where's her bedroom?" "Upstairs, corner room, east side." Rowan climbed the stairs, Vaughn and Wren following. The second floor had 6 bedrooms, each one closed off behind a door that stuck from humidity and neglect. She found the corner room by instinct more than direction. The door opened into a time capsule. Posters on the walls, Alanis Morissette, Friends, Titanic, a dresser with makeup scattered across the surface tubes and compacts from the 90s. A bed with a handmade quilt, the indentation of a head still visible on the pillow. A nightstand with a diary, the leather cover embossed with a small brass lock. Rowan sat on the bed, the mattress sighing beneath her weight. Wren climbed up beside her, suddenly subdued by the strangeness of this preserved grief. Did my grandma sleep here? Your great-grandma, yeah. It's pretty. Wren touched the quilt, tracing the pattern. She liked purple. Lavender, actually, but close enough. The whole room was shades of purple and cream, decorated by a girl who'd still believed in beauty and possibility. Before pregnancy, before running, before the car went off the road in the rain and everything ended. Rowan was 28 years old. Her mother had been 19 when she died, 9 years younger than Rowan was now. A child really trying to raise a child. The grief that hit her then was unexpected and overwhelming. She'd never mourned Colette before. How could you mourn someone you'd never known? But standing in this room, seeing the evidence of a girl's truncated life, she felt the loss like a fresh wound. Vaughn waited in the doorway, giving her space. Finally, he spoke. Frank's study is on the third floor. That is where he kept the original whistle. I think we should retrieve it before Griggs decides to make another appearance. They climbed to the third floor, which was really just the tower room, a circular space with windows on all sides offering 360-degree views of the property. A massive oak desk dominated the center, its surface covered in papers held down by river rocks. Bookshelves lined the walls between windows, crammed with volumes on agriculture, Appalachian history, coal mining, forestry. A gun safe stood in one corner, a fireplace in another, cold and clean. On the mantel above the fireplace, 3 photographs in identical frames, a baby with a shock of dark hair, a child of maybe 6, red-haired, gap-toothed, laughing at something off camera, a teenager holding an infant, exhaustion and fierce love warring on her face. Rowan recognized herself in the photos. The baby, the child, the young mother. Frank had documented her life from a distance, collecting images like evidence of her existence. Beside the frames, an envelope with her name written in fountain pen, to Rowan, open when you arrive with Wren. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind of stationery people didn't use anymore. She opened it carefully, aware of Vaughn and Wren watching, aware that whatever was inside would change everything. The letter's first line cut through 28 years of silence. If you're reading this, you found your way home. Rowan's vision blurred. She blinked hard, forcing focus, and read on while Wren leaned against her side and Vaughn stood respectfully distant. Your mama Colette left when you were 6 months old. We fought terrible that night. I said things no father should say. She drove off in the rain with you, bundled in her arms. They found her car at the bottom of Mercer's Gorge 2 days later. The vehicle was empty. No bodies. For years I told myself she'd survived somehow, taken you and disappeared to punish me. I hired investigators, spent every penny I had, found nothing for 15 years. Then in 2008, a private detective traced the accident report. The state had taken you from the hospital where Colette died from her injuries 3 hours after the crash. You'd been strapped in your car seat unhurt. They'd tried to locate family. I was right here, and they never found me because I'd been searching in all the wrong places, assuming Colette was alive and hiding. By the time I learned where you were, you'd been in foster care for 13 years. I petitioned for custody. The state said no, too old, too isolated, unsuitable. They were probably right. What did I know about raising a teenage girl? I couldn't even keep my own daughter safe. But I watched you, social worker. I knew a woman named Patricia Moss who owed me a favor. She sent pictures sometimes. Your school photos. You graduating high school against all odds. Then 5 years ago, she told me you were pregnant. 23 years old, alone, working at that packaging plant, barely scraping by. I wanted to come get you right then. Lawyer said wait. Said if I appeared out of nowhere claiming to be your grandfather, you'd think I was after something or trying to take your baby. Said you needed time to become who you were meant to be without interference. So I waited. I watched. I saw you have Wren. Patricia sent me the birth announcement you posted on Facebook. Most beautiful baby I'd ever seen, except for Colette, except for you. Then I knew it was time. Behind the iron door in the East Barn is everything I couldn't give you when you were small. Your history, your inheritance, your future. The key only works when you bring Wren home. A mother protects land for her children. You understand that now in a way you couldn't have before. I'm sorry I never held you, Rowan. Sorry I never heard you call me Granddad. Sorry I failed Colette so completely that she'd rather die in a storm than come back to me. But I'm not sorry I waited for you to be ready. You're strong, stronger than I ever was. You'll fight for this place the way I couldn't teach Colette to fight. Welcome home, little girl. Take care of my great-granddaughter. The barn's waiting. Everything you need to know is down there. Granddad Frank, written, February 2023. 1 month before I died, the signature wavered at the end, the handwriting of someone whose strength was failing. Rowan folded the letter carefully, her hands steadier than she'd expected. Grief was there certainly for the grandfather she'd never known, for the mother who'd died too young, for all the years they'd been separated by circumstance and bad timing. But underneath the grief was something harder and more useful: determination. Frank had waited. He'd believed she'd come. He'd built her a path home. She wasn't about to waste it. Wren tugged at her sleeve. What did Granddad Frank write? How did you explain generational trauma and bureaucratic failure to a 5-year-old? He said he's been watching over us. He said there's something important in the barn and we need to go see it. The child's face lit with adventure story excitement. The treasure, close enough. Rowan looked at Vaughn. You've never been inside that door. Frank wouldn't allow it, said it was for you alone. He paused. I should warn you, Griggs has been trying to get into that barn for months. He's convinced there's something valuable hidden there. Mineral rights documentation maybe, or proof of some other asset that would increase the property's worth. If he realizes you've opened it, he'll escalate. Let him. They descended through the house, footsteps echoing in the stone-walled silence. Outside, afternoon sun slanted through the trees, turning everything amber. The east barn was the largest of the 4 outbuildings, timber-framed with hand-hewn beams visible through gaps in the weathered siding. The door was massive, iron-strapped oak that had swollen with humidity over decades. Rowan pulled it open with both hands, the hinges screaming protest. Inside, the barn smelled of ancient hay and machine oil and time itself. Farm equipment from various eras sat in corners, a hay rake, a seed spreader, tools whose purposes she couldn't identify. In the center stood a tractor so old it might have been museum-worthy green paint, faded to sage rust, claiming the wheel wells. And at the far end, beneath a hayloft that sagged dangerously, was the iron door. It was smaller than she'd imagined, maybe 6 feet tall, 4 feet wide, but impossibly solid. Steel plate riveted together, the kind of construction meant to withstand anything short of explosives. A padlock the size of a dinner plate hung from a hasp welded to the frame. Wren ran ahead, her small hands reaching for the metal. It's cold, Mama. Rowan approached slowly, the key heavy in her palm. The lock's keyhole was small, delicate compared to the massive hardware surrounding it. She inserted the key, felt it slide home with mechanical precision, and turned. The lock opened with a sound like breaking glass. She pulled it free from the hasp and let it fall to the dirt floor. The door's handle was iron smooth from use, and when she pulled, the door swung outward on hinges that moved silently, despite decades of disuse. Frank had maintained this mechanism. He'd kept it ready. Beyond the door, stone steps descended into darkness. Vaughn found a light switch inside the frame. Fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, revealing a staircase that dropped 15 feet into bedrock. The walls were stone, hand-carved, shored up with timber beams that spoke of serious engineering. This wasn't a root cellar or a storm shelter. This was something else entirely. Rowan started down, Wren's hand tightened hers. The temperature dropped with each step, cool air rising to meet them. At the bottom, the space opened into a room roughly 50 feet by 40, the ceiling supported by pillars of native stone, left standing when the rest was excavated. The walls were covered floor to ceiling with wooden shelves, and on those shelves were hundreds of leather-bound journals. Dates were embossed on the spines in gold leaf: 1898, 1899, 1900, continuing in unbroken sequence to 2023. Family records spanning 125 years. Cork boards covered the sections of wall without shelves, pinned thick with documents. Property maps showing how the Thorne holdings had expanded and contracted over generations. A family tree going back to 1790, names and dates in careful calligraphy. Photographs documenting every era from daguerreotype to digital printouts. And there, taking up an entire board by itself, was Colette's life in pictures, baby photos, school portraits, birthday parties, teenage rebellion, captured in snapshot after snapshot. Beside them, another board for Rowan, her foster care school photos arranged chronologically, each one labeled with the date and the name of whichever family had been keeping her that year. The last section showed her pregnant, then with newborn, Wren images clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Frank had documented everything, had kept watch, had never stopped hoping. In the center of the room stood a large oak table, its surface scarred by decades of use. On it sat a metal strongbox, dull steel with a combination lock. Beside the box, an envelope with Rowan's name. She opened the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper with three numbers, 10 to 2896. October 28th, 1996. The date Colette had become pregnant with Rowan. The strongbox opened easily once she'd entered the combination. Inside, organized in labeled folders with the precision of someone who'd known exactly what he was leaving behind, was her inheritance. The first folder held land deeds. The original 1898 purchase signed by Frank's great-grandfather, witnessed and notarized. Subsequent acquisitions through the years, the property growing from 80 acres to 287, survey maps hand-drawn and professional, showing every boundary stone, every creek, every structure. And most importantly, a document dated 1960, clearly stating that Franklin J. Thorne retained all mineral rights to the property in perpetuity. Vaughn examined the mineral rights document with the reverence of someone who understood its significance. This is what Griggs has been looking for. Without proof of retained mineral rights, he could claim the coal companies own the subsurface. He could lease drilling rights, strip mine the entire property, and your ownership of the surface land would become worthless. The second folder contained bank documents. An account opened in 2019 at Appalachian Trust Bank, Rowan's name on the paperwork as sole beneficiary. Monthly statements showed deposits of $3,000 from something called Thorne Mineral Royalties, LLC. The current balance was $124,000. Rowan stared at the number until it stopped meaning anything. Yesterday, she'd had $115. Today, she had enough money to live on for years if she was careful. Frank leased mineral rights to a natural gas company in 2015, Vaughn explained. Small operation, very ethical, minimal environmental impact. They pay quarterly royalties. He never touched the money, just let it accumulate for you. The third folder was thinner, but its contents hit harder than any financial document. Missing person investigation reports for Colette Thorne, 1997 through 2015. Private detective invoices totaling over $200,000. Police reports. Hospital records from the night of the accident. And at the very bottom, a death certificate Rowan had never seen. Colette Marie Thorne died March 14, 1997, age 19, cause of death, blunt force trauma sustained in motor vehicle accident. She'd been 19, 9 years younger than Rowan was now. The fourth folder was labeled Iris in Frank's handwriting, and beneath it crossed out Rowan written in. She opened it to find her own life documented with bureaucratic precision. Foster care placement records, school transcripts, medical records, employment history, and photographs, dozens of them, chronicled by someone who'd had to love from a distance. The fifth folder made her stomach drop. It was thick, stuffed with documents bearing the letterhead Griggs Mountain Development, a contract from 2019 offering Frank $1.8 million for the property. Frank's rejection letter, handwritten blunt, this land stays Thorne, forever. Multiple subsequent offers, each one higher, each one rejected. Then the tone shifted. Letters from Griggs became threats barely disguised as business correspondence. You'll regret this decision. Old men die alone in these mountains. Accidents happen to people who don't know when to sell. And at the bottom of the folder, an insurance claim form dated July 2020. The smallest barn had burned to the foundation. Cause of fire ruled as arson. No suspects identified. Claim denied due to suspicious circumstances. Vaughn's face had gone pale. I didn't know about the threats. Frank never told me. He was protecting me, Rowan said quietly, making sure I'd have evidence if Griggs tried anything. The sixth folder contained a document she almost missed in her anger over the threats, a development proposal Griggs had submitted to Lewis County Planning Commission in March 2023, 2 weeks before Frank died. The proposal was glossy, professional, full of architectural renderings and economic impact projections. Ashford Summit Estates would transform Thorne property into a luxury mountain resort, 400 vacation homes ranging from $500,000 to $2 million each. A ski lodge with high-speed lifts accessing the north face, a golf course carved through the valley, an estimated construction cost of $80 million with projected returns exceeding $45 million in the first 10 years alone. At the back of the proposal was an investor list, 83 names mostly from Charleston and Richmond and D.C., each one marked with a deposit amount. The total pre-sale commitments added to $4.1 million. Rowan understood then why Griggs was so desperate. He'd already spent that money or promised it or leveraged it. If he didn't acquire the property, he'd have to return millions to investors who trusted him with their deposits. The lawsuits alone would destroy him. She pulled out her phone, barely any signal in the underground room, but enough, and started photographing every page of the Griggs folder. Vaughn caught on quickly, helping her arrange documents for clearer images. "We can use this in court," he said. "Proof of motive, proof of pattern. If we can show Griggs has been threatening Frank and attempting to acquire the property through intimidation." A crash from above, loud enough to shake dust from the rafters. They froze. Footsteps echoed in the barn. Overhead, heavy boots on packed earth, multiple sets. "Stay here," Vaughn whispered, but Rowan was already moving toward the stairs. She emerged into the barn to find Keaton Griggs standing 10 feet from the iron door, flanked by two men in work clothes who looked like they'd been hired more for muscle than carpentry skills. Griggs held a pry bar, and the barn's main door stood open behind them. His eyes locked on the open iron door, then on Rowan, and his expression cycled through shock, rage, and calculation in rapid succession. "You opened it. It's my property, my door, my barn." Her voice was steadier than her hands. "The court gave me caretaker status. That means I have every right to inspect." "Breaking and entering," Vaughn interrupted, emerging from the doorway behind Rowan. "That's what you're doing. Miss Marlowe has exclusive rights as Frank's heir until the court rules otherwise. You were granted access for maintenance purposes, only not unlimited entry." Griggs turned the pry bar in his hands, testing its weight. The two men behind him shifted their stances, waiting for orders. The air in the barn felt suddenly thin. "Whatever you found down there belongs to the estate. I'm the court-appointed caretaker of the estate. You're a vulture who threatened my grandfather and tried to scare him into selling." Rowan pulled out her phone, showed him the screen, displaying his own threatening letter. "I have documentation, all of it. Every threat, every shady deal, every piece of evidence that you've been targeting this property for years." His face went carefully blank. "You don't know what you're talking about. Ashford Summit Estates, 400 vacation homes, 4.1 million in investor deposits. You need this land because you've already spent money you don't have." She took a step forward. "How much trouble are you in, Mr. Griggs? How many lawsuits are you facing when those investors realize you can't deliver?" The pry bar swung up fast, stopping inches from her face. She didn't flinch. Behind her, she heard Vaughn's sharp intake of breath, heard Wren's small gasp from the doorway. "Careful," Griggs said softly. "Accidents happen on construction sites. Old barns collapse. People get hurt. Are you threatening me in front of witnesses?" He lowered the pry bar slowly. "I'm stating facts. This property's dangerous. The barn's unstable. Look at that hayloft. One strong wind, and it'll come down. The house has no utilities, no heat. Winter's coming. What are you going to do, freeze with your kid while you chase some fantasy of playing farmer?" The ugly truth was, he had a point. She had no plan, no resources beyond the bank account she'd just discovered, no experience maintaining a property this size. She was a packaging plant worker with a high school diploma and a daughter who needed stability, not adventure. But she'd spent her entire life being told she didn't belong anywhere, and she was done accepting it. "Get off my land." Griggs studied her for a long moment, then smiled with the confidence of someone who knew he'd win eventually. 18 days, Miss Marlowe. 17 now, actually. Court hearing December 28th. When you lose, I'll buy this place for $400,000, and you'll walk away with nothing because you were too stubborn to take the deal." He gestured to his men, and they filed out. The sound of their truck starting, then driving away, left a silence that felt like aftermath. Vaughn touched her shoulder. That was either very brave or very foolish. Probably both. She was shaking now, adrenaline catching up. Wren appeared at her side, wrapping both arms around her waist. "I didn't like him before. Now I really don't like him." "Me neither, Bird." They secured the iron door, though the lock was broken, now opened, and left the barn. Vaughn checked his watch. "I should get back to town, file a police report about Griggs's trespassing. Document everything while it's fresh." But Rowan was staring at the house, at its dark windows and stone walls. "How do I get the electricity turned back on?" "You'd need to contact Appalachian Power, set up an account pass inspection. It'll take weeks." "What about the well?" "Probably needs a new pump. That's expensive, and you'd need a licensed contractor." "How much is expensive?" $3,000-4,000 for parts and labor. She had $124,000 she'd learned about 30 minutes ago. 3,000 was suddenly manageable. "Can you recommend someone?" Vaughn hesitated. "My nephew Fletcher is a contractor. Was anyway. He's mostly retired now, does odd jobs. He's honest, won't overcharge you." Call him, tell him I'll pay cash for emergency service. Rowan, you can't just move in here. The place isn't habitable. She looked at Wren, who was watching with those two knowing eyes children developed when their mothers struggled. We've lived in worse. At least this place is ours. The words hung in the air, simple and revolutionary. Ours. A place that belonged to them, that no landlord could take away, that no bureaucrat could revoke. It was haunted and broken and half collapsed, but it was theirs. Vaughn left with promises to send Fletcher out first thing in the morning and to file the police report about Griggs. His taillights disappeared down the wooded drive, and then Rowan and Wren were alone with the mountain and the house and the weight of inheritance. They spent the remaining daylight hours exploring, taking inventory. The kitchen had a hand pump at the sink that still produced water after vigorous priming, not safe to drink yet, but good enough for washing. The fireplace worked, and there was split wood stacked in a shed beside the house, seasoned and dry. Upstairs, Colette's bedroom had a closet full of blankets that smelled like cedar and preservation. As darkness fell, Rowan built a fire in the parlor fireplace, using techniques half-remembered from a camping trip a foster family had taken her on when she was 12. The flames caught, eventually crackling and spitting, throwing dancing light against the stone walls. They ate crackers and peanut butter from the supplies in Rowan's backpack, rationing because she didn't know when she'd get to a grocery store. Wren didn't complain, just carefully assembled each cracker and peanut butter sandwich with the concentration of a chef plating a 5-star meal. Mama, are we really staying here? For a while, until we figure things out. What about school? Rowan hadn't thought that far ahead. We'll find something. Maybe there's a school in town. What about your work? The plant closed, remember? I don't have work anymore. Wren absorbed this with the pragmatism of a child who'd always known security was conditional. So we're starting over. Yeah, Bird, we're starting over. That night, they slept in Colette's room, in Colette's bed, wrapped in Colette's quilts. The mattress sagged in the middle, and the whole house creaked and settled, like a ship in harbor, but Wren fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by the day's upheavals. Rowan lay awake watching moonlight track across the ceiling through windows whose curtains she hadn't drawn. Somewhere outside, an owl called. Wind moved through the trees with a sound like ocean waves. The house breathed around her, old timbers expanding and contracting stone, holding the day's heat. She thought about Frank, alone in this house for decades, maintaining it with the faith that someday she'd come. She thought about Colette, 19 and pregnant and desperate, driving into a storm rather than admit she needed help. She thought about all the years they'd been separated by pride and misunderstanding and bad luck. But she was here now. She'd found her way home, however belatedly, however broken the path had been. Morning came cold and bright. Rowan woke to Wren standing at the window, breath fogging the glass as she stared out at the property. Mama, there's so many birds. She joined her daughter, and together they watched the morning unfold. Cardinals and blue jays and sparrows, a red-tailed hawk circling, high deer emerging from the tree line to graze in the overgrown meadow. A pickup truck came up the drive around 8, a battered Ford Ranger painted in primer gray. The man who climbed out was in his mid-30s, tall and lean, with work-roughened hands and the economical movements of someone who'd spent his life doing physical labor. He wore Carhartt pants and a flannel shirt, both well-worn but clean. Rowan met him on the porch. You must be Fletcher. Fletcher Pritchard. Uncle Al said you needed help with a well pump, and about a dozen other things, but the well's priority. He nodded, already assessing the property with a contractor's eye. Mind if I take a look? She showed him to the well house, a small shed behind the kitchen. He spent 10 minutes examining the pump, testing fittings, checking pressure tanks. When he emerged, his expression was professionally neutral. Pump's shot, probably been failing for years. Need to replace the whole assembly's pump pressure bar tank wiring. I can get parts from town, have it running by tonight if I start now. How much? $3,000 for everything, parts and labor. Done. He blinked. You don't want to get other quotes. Do you know other contractors who will come out on 12 hours notice? Fair point. He pulled out a notepad, started listing what he'd need. Rowan left him to his work and returned to the house, where Wren was systematically pulling every sheet off the furniture in the parlor, revealing Victorian sofas and chairs that had somehow survived a century mostly intact. The day passed in a blur of activity. Fletcher worked on the well, occasionally coming to the house to ask questions about the electrical system or the water lines. Rowan cleaned, sweeping decades of dust, washing windows, airing out rooms that hadn't seen sunlight in years. Wren helped with the concentration of a child given important responsibilities, carrying small items, sorting books on shelves, arranging Colette's childhood toys in careful rows. By late afternoon, the well pump hummed to life with a sound like resurrection. Water flowed from the kitchen tap, rust red at first, then gradually clearing. Fletcher showed Rowan how to prime the system, how to monitor the pressure gauge, how to troubleshoot if it failed. "You'll want to get the water tested before drinking it," he said. "I can take a sample to the county health department tomorrow." "Thank you." He hesitated then. "Uncle Al told me about Griggs, about what he's trying to do." "You know him?" "Everybody knows him. He's been buying up property around here for 10 years, always at fire sale prices because nobody has money to fight him in court." Fletcher's jaw tightened. "Your granddad helped my family once. Paid my dad's hospital bills when we had nothing. Wouldn't take repayment, said we could pay it forward someday." "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking, I'm offering. This place needs work, roof, electrical, plumbing, foundation repairs. I can do most of it myself, charge you materials only. Consider it settling the debt. Pride warred with practicality, pride lost. I'll pay you fair rate for labor. We'll argue about it later. For now, let's focus on making this place livable before winter." He left as sunset painted the mountains gold and crimson, promising to return in the morning with supplies for the roof. Rowan stood on the porch watching his taillights disappear, feeling the strange sensation of not being entirely alone. That evening, she and Wren ate dinner in the kitchen by lamplight, sandwiches made from bread and cheese Fletcher had brought from town, the first real meal they'd had in days. The water from the tap tasted of minerals and stone cold and clean. After dinner, Rowan returned to the underground archive room. She needed to understand what Frank had left. Her needed to read the story preserved in those leather-bound journals. She started with 1898, the year Frank's great-grandfather had bought the property. The handwriting was elaborate 19th century script, difficult to parse, but the content was clear. A Scottish immigrant named Angus Thorne had worked 15 years in the coal mines, saving every penny, dreaming of land he could call his own. The journals chronicled a family building itself from nothing. Angus clearing fields, planting crops, raising livestock. His wife Sarah keeping accounts with meticulous precision. Their children, 4 boys, 2 girls growing up with mountain dirt under their fingernails, and the satisfaction of owning something permanent. Rowan skipped ahead to 1946, the year Frank was born. His father's handwriting noting the birth with simple joy, a son, named him Franklin after Sarah's father. Strong lungs, Helena's doing well. Then Frank's own journals began in 1960, when he would have been 14. The writing was unsure at first, adolescent observations about farming and weather and the tedious pace of mountain life. But by 1906, the entries showed a young man coming into himself, taking on more responsibility as his father's health failed. She found the entry from 1976. Helena gave birth at home, a girl. Red hair like her mother. We named her Colette after Helena's grandmother. She's perfect. I've never loved anything so immediately and completely. Then 1989, Helena died this morning, cancer. She fought so hard. Colette's 13 and doesn't know how to grieve except through anger. I don't know how to help her. The entries became sparser after that gaps of weeks or months between writings. But Rowan found July 96, Colette's 18, graduated high school. She's angry at me for reasons I don't understand. Says I suffocate her, that she needs to leave this mountain. I told her to go to college, see the world, then come back. She said I just don't get it. October 1996. She's pregnant. Won't tell me who the father is. I said things I regret, called her irresponsible, said she'd thrown away her future. She told me to go to hell. March 1997. Colette's gone. Took the baby 6 months old. She's been calling her Iris and left in the middle of the night. I found a note. I'll figure it out on my own. Don't look for me. But I'm looking. God help me, I'm looking. The next 100 pages were hell compressed into handwriting private investigators' reports. Dead ends, false leads, the slow dissolution of hope. Until 2008. Found out what happened. Colette crashed her car 2 days after she left. Baby survived. They placed her in foster care. Colette died in the hospital. I was right here and nobody told me. My granddaughter's been in the system for 11 years. 2008 through 2018 chronicled Frank's failed custody battle and his subsequent surveillance of Rowan's life from a distance. Then 2020. She had a baby, named her Wren. Rowan's struggling in the factory, cut hours she's behind on rent. I want to help, but Patricia says no. Says Rowan needs to find her own strength first. The final entry was dated February 2023. Chest hurts more every day. Doctor says months at most. I've made arrangements. Everything's ready. If Rowan comes home, she'll find what she needs to fight Griggs. If she doesn't, well, I tried. I hope that counts for something. Rowan closed the journal, tears tracking silent down her face. Frank had spent the last 26 years of his life watching over someone he'd never met, protecting an inheritance for a future he'd never see. The least she could do was make sure his faith hadn't been wasted. Fletcher returned at dawn with a truck bed full of roofing supplies and two men he introduced as his cousins, both in their 20s, both with the same economical build that came from a lifetime of manual labor. They started work before the morning dew had burned off, the sound of hammers echoing across the property like irregular heartbeats. Rowan spent the morning in the archive room, photographing every document that might be useful in court. The Griggs folder alone took 300 images. She uploaded them to a cloud storage account using the weak cell signal, paranoid about losing the only evidence that could save them. By noon, Wren had grown restless with the adult business of survival. She'd explored every room in the house, played with every abandoned toy in Colette's bedroom, and was now standing at the kitchen window with the particular stillness children achieved when they were profoundly bored. "Can I go outside?" Rowan looked up from the documents spread across the kitchen table. "Stay where I can see you from the window." The child vanished like smoke, and seconds later Rowan watched her run across the overgrown lawn toward the smaller barns. The property was safe enough, fenced, isolated, nothing more dangerous than raccoons and the occasional black bear that would avoid humans anyway. But the mother anxiety never fully shut off that constant low-level awareness that disaster could strike in the space between heartbeats. She returned to the documents, forcing focus. Vaughn had called that morning to say the police had taken his report about Griggs's trespassing, but seemed uninterested in pursuing it. The sheriff apparently played golf with Griggs every Tuesday, small-town politics at their finest. The sound of an engine broke her concentration, not Fletcher's truck, something heavier. She went to the window and felt her stomach drop. Griggs's Ram was back, but this time he wasn't alone. 3 vehicles total: his truck, a county van marked building inspection, and a sheriff's cruiser. Rowan was out the door before they'd fully parked, intercepting them in the drive. The building inspector was a woman in her 50s, clipboard in hand, expression professionally neutral. The sheriff was Buck Hadley, the man Vaughn had mentioned, 60 pounds overweight and radiating the self-importance of someone used to small authority. Griggs smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd outmaneuvered an opponent. "Miss Marlowe, I've brought county officials to conduct a safety inspection. As court-appointed caretaker, it's my responsibility to ensure the property meets code. You're not setting foot in that house." The inspector stepped forward, her voice carefully diplomatic. "Ma'am, Mr. Griggs has requested an emergency inspection based on concerns about structural integrity and habitability. I have the authority to conduct that inspection with or without your cooperation. And if I refuse, then Sheriff Hadley can detain you for obstruction, and I'll conduct the inspection anyway." The trap closed with perfect precision. Rowan looked at Hadley, who had his hand resting on his belt near his cuffs, waiting for an excuse. She could fight and lose, or she could let them in and document whatever fabricated violations they invented. "Fine, but I'm filming everything." She pulled out her phone, started recording. The inspector didn't object, probably used to it, but Griggs's jaw tightened. They proceeded into the house, the inspector making notes on her clipboard, while Griggs pointed out every imperfection with the enthusiasm of a prosecutor building a case. No electricity, no central heating, windows are single-pane drafty. Foundation shows signs of settling. That crack in the wall, there's structural damage. The staircase railing is loose. Roof leaks in multiple locations. "Roof's being repaired right now," Rowan interrupted, "which means it's currently non-compliant." Griggs turned to the inspector. "This building is uninhabitable by any reasonable standard. There's a child living here, for God's sake." The inspector walked through each room, methodically testing outlets that didn't work, checking windows, examining walls. Her face remained professionally blank, but Rowan could see the gears turning. This woman probably had kids of her own. She was being asked to condemn a mother's only shelter. They reached Colette's bedroom, where evidence of habitation was obvious. The bed unmade, Wren's stuffed rabbit on the pillowclothes folded on the dresser. "You're actually sleeping here." The inspector's neutrality cracked slightly. "We have water. We have heat from the fireplace. We have shelter. That's more than some people have. The fireplace hasn't been inspected in decades. Could have a cracked flue carbon monoxide buildup. You could die in your sleep." Griggs seized the opening. "You see, this is exactly what I've been saying. The property's a death trap. Miss Marlowe is endangering herself and her child by staying here. The county has an obligation to intervene." The inspector made more notes, her pen scratching against paper, like small judgments accumulating. They continued through the house, finding fault with everything: the kitchen's ancient wiring, the bathroom's corroded pipes, the basement's moisture damage. Every flaw became evidence of negligence, of unsuitability, of danger. When they finally left, the inspector handed Rowan a carbon copy of her report. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises pending remediation of the violations listed. If you're still here after that, Child Protective Services will be notified. The words hit like a physical blow. CPS. They would take Wren, put her in foster care while Rowan fought legal battles she couldn't afford. The child would end up in the same system that had broken Rowan, and the cycle would continue for another generation. Griggs was already walking back to his truck, victory radiating from every step. Hadley lingered, thumbs hooked in his belt, making sure she understood the threat was real. Ma'am, I'd suggest you take the inspector's advice. Get yourself and your daughter somewhere safe. This is somewhere safe. It's our home. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen. You're in over your head. He left with that assessment hanging in the air, and Rowan stood in the driveway clutching the inspection report, feeling the walls close in. 72 hours. 3 days to fix violations that would take months and thousands of dollars to properly address. Fletcher appeared from around the house, having witnessed the entire exchange from the roof. What did they cite you for? She handed him the report. He read it quickly, his expression darkening with each line. Half of these are bullshit. The foundation's solid. The staircase just needs tightening. The fireplace is fine. I checked it yesterday. They're manufacturing violations. Can you prove that? Not in 72 hours. There it was. The timeline was designed to be impossible. Griggs had found a legal weapon that bypassed courts and inheritance law. He was using the county itself to force her out. Wren came running from wherever she'd been exploring, sensing distress with the radar children possessed. Mama, what's wrong? How did you explain to a 5-year-old that the system was rigged, that people with money and connections could weaponize bureaucracy? That home was always conditional when you had nothing. Nothing, Bird, just some paperwork. But Wren had lived through enough evictions to recognize the pattern. Her face crumpled, and she wrapped herself around Rowan's legs with desperate strength. Are they taking our castle? The question broke something in Rowan's chest. She crouched down, pulled her daughter close. Nobody's taking anything. We're going to fix whatever they say needs fixing, and we're staying right here. Promise, but though promises were dangerous. Promises created expectations that reality loved to crush. But sometimes you had to lie to give a child something to hold on to. Promise. Fletcher was on his phone, pacing, voice low and urgent. When he finished the call, he rejoined them with the focused intensity of someone who just shifted into problem-solving mode. I've got people coming. Electricians, plumbers, HVAC guys, everyone who owes me favors or remembers what Frank did for them. We've got 3 days to make this house pass inspection. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling you what's happening. Now get me Frank's checkbook and a list of priorities. The next 72 hours blurred into controlled chaos. Electricians rewired the house, bringing it up to code with new breakers and GFCI outlets. Plumbers replaced corroded pipes, installed a water heater Fletcher found used but functional. An HVAC contractor jury-rigged a heating system using existing ductwork and a salvaged furnace. The work crew grew beyond Fletcher's initial cousins. Men and women appeared with tools and skills, many of them elderly, all of them with stories about Frank. He'd helped this one avoid foreclosure in 2008. He'd paid for that one's daughter's wedding when the family had nothing. He'd given another a job during the mine closures, no questions asked. They worked dawn to dusk, refusing payment beyond materials. By the second day, Temperance showed up with enough food to feed an army: fried chicken, biscuits, green beans, potato salad, setting up a buffet line on sawhorses in the yard. Folks need feeding when they're working, she announced. And you look half-starved, girl. Sit down and eat something. Rowan sat more from exhaustion than obedience. Temperance settled beside her with the ease of someone used to inserting herself into other people's lives. You're doing good standing up to Griggs. Most people fold. Most people probably have better options. Maybe, but Frank didn't leave this place to someone with options. He left it to someone with spine. She paused, studying Rowan with eyes that had seen decades of mountain hardship. You know what this is really about, don't you? It's not about the money or the resort. It's about Griggs proving he owns this town. Does he? He owns the sheriff and half the county commissioners. He owns the bank that holds mortgages on most of the businesses downtown. But he doesn't own the land, not yet. And if you hold on to Thorne property, you prove he can't take everything. The responsibility of that being the symbolic resistance to a man who'd systematically bought up a town felt crushing. Rowan had just wanted a place to live. Now she was somehow the last stand against corruption. I don't know how to be what people need me to be. Nobody does, honey. You just keep breathing and doing the next thing, and eventually you look back and realize you survived. By the end of day 3, the house had been transformed. Not perfect, there were still cosmetic issues, still repairs that would take months, but functional. The lights worked. The heat worked. The water ran hot and cold. A certified Inspector Fletcher had called in from the next county over, walked through and signed off on everything, providing documentation that the property met code. The reinspection happened at 9 the next morning. The same woman from before walked through with her clipboard, testing everything, clearly surprised by the transformation. Griggs showed up midway through, his face darkening when he saw the working lights and heard the furnace humming. "This is impossible. You couldn't have—" "But we did." Rowan met his eyes, letting him see that she wasn't backing down. "The house passes code. You have no grounds to force us out." The inspector finished her examination and signed the approval form. "Property is compliant with county habitability standards. Occupancy approved." Griggs tried to argue something about the speed of repairs, suggesting substandard work, about needing additional time to verify contractor licenses, but the inspector shut him down with professional finality. The law had been satisfied. He had no legal avenue left for immediate eviction. But as he was leaving, he stopped beside Rowan with a warning delivered so quietly only she could hear. "You think you've won something. All you've done is make this harder on yourself. The court date's in 2 weeks. When you lose, you'll owe me for every day you've delayed the inevitable." The court date approached with the inevitability of winter. Vaughn prepared their case with the thoroughness of someone who understood the stakes. He'd compiled evidence, the mineral rights documentation, Frank's medical records proving mental competence, the threatening letters from Griggs' testimony from townspeople about Frank's character. But on December 26, 2 days before the hearing, he called with news that made Rowan's stomach drop. Griggs filed an additional motion. He's claiming that even if you're the rightful heir, you haven't met the conditions Frank set for inheritance. He says there were stipulations in the will conditions you need to fulfill before the property fully transfers. What conditions? That's the problem. The pages detailing those conditions were removed from the county file. Without the original will, we can't prove what Frank actually required. The original will is in Frank's study. We found it that first day. Then we need to retrieve it immediately and file it with the court. But Rowan, if Griggs knows about those conditions and you don't, he could be setting a trap. Whatever Frank required, you need to be prepared to meet it. Rowan went to the study, found the will exactly where they'd left it, in the desk's bottom drawer. She'd been so focused on the threatening letters and financial documents that she'd never actually read the will itself. The first pages were standard legal language, but then came the codicil dated separately, added just months before Frank died. The inheritance is conditional upon the following requirements to be completed within 1 calendar year of the heir taking possession. 1. The heir must reside on the property for 365 consecutive days. 2. The main house must be restored to livable condition, meeting all county building codes. 3. 1 complete growing season must be observed. The heir must plant and harvest at least 1 crop, demonstrating commitment to agricultural stewardship. 4. The heir must read all of Colette's personal diaries in their entirety, understanding the family history and the mistakes that must not be repeated. 5. Should any party contest this will with provable malicious intent, that party shall forfeit any claim to the estate and shall be liable for all legal costs incurred by the rightful heir. Rowan read it 3 times, her heart rate accelerating with each pass. The conditions were achievable but demanding. She'd already spent 2 weeks on the property, only 350 days to go. The house was livable now thanks to Fletcher and the work crew. She could plant something in spring harvest by fall. She'd already started reading Colette's diaries. The last condition, though, that was the knife aimed at Griggs's throat. She called Vaughn immediately. "The will has a clause. If someone contests it with malicious intent, they forfeit their claim and pay my legal fees." Malicious intent is hard to prove. I have his threatening letters to Frank. I have evidence he's been targeting this property for years. I have documentation of his development scheme that requires him to acquire this land. That's motive. That's malice. Vaughn's silence stretched for several seconds. When he spoke again, his voice carried cautious hope. "If we can prove that to a judge, we don't just win the inheritance. We make him pay for trying to steal it." The hearing was set for 9 a.m. on December 28th at Lewis County Courthouse. Rowan woke before dawn, nerves making sleep impossible. She dressed in the only decent clothes she owned, black pants and a white shirt, both purchased from Goodwill years ago for job interviews that had gone nowhere. Wren sat on the bed watching her, unusually solemn. Are they going to take the castle? Not if I can help it. What if they do anyway? Children asked the questions adults were too cowardly to voice. Rowan sat beside her daughter, pulling her close. Then we figure out what comes next. But we don't give up before the fights even started. Temperance had offered to watch Wren during the hearing, and Fletcher drove Rowan to the courthouse in his truck, both of them silent with the weight of what was coming. The courthouse was a brick building from the 20s, imposing in the way small-town government buildings tried to be all columns and marble, and the appearance of impartial justice. Griggs was already there with his 3 lawyers, all of them in suits that cost more than Rowan's monthly income had been. They watched her enter with the confidence of people who'd already won. Vaughn met her in the hallway, briefcase in hand. Judge Margaret Brennan is presiding. Former coal miner's daughter worked her way through law school. She's fair but tough. Don't try to play on sympathy, stick to facts. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected, wood-paneled and formal, with a West Virginia state seal behind the judge's bench. About 20 spectators filled the gallery. Townspeople who'd come to watch, a few reporters from regional newspapers, Temperance in the front row, with her hands clasped like prayer. Judge Brennan entered at precisely 9, a woman in her late 50s, with steel gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms watching people lie. She called the court to order, reviewed the case summary, and turned to Griggs's lead attorney. Mr. Chen, your client is contesting the will of Franklin Thorne. Make your case. Chen stood, and for the next 20 minutes he painted a picture of an elderly man in declining health, isolated and confused, making irrational decisions. He presented medical records from Frank's last year showing a heart condition and prescribed medications. These medications list confusion and memory loss as potential side effects. Mr. Thorne was 77 years old, living alone with no family to monitor his mental state. The will was written just months before his death, suggesting it was the product of diminished capacity rather than sound judgment. He moved on to Rowan, describing her as an opportunistic stranger who'd appeared only after Frank's death, making claims to an estate she had no real connection to. Miss Marlowe grew up in foster care. There's no evidence she ever met Franklin Thorne or that he had any relationship with her whatsoever. The existence of a key and a letter could be fabricated or could represent a decision made by a confused elderly man. Vaughn rose for his turn, spreading documents across the plaintiff's table with the precision of someone building an irrefutable argument. Your Honor, we have DNA evidence confirming Miss Marlowe is Colette Thorne's daughter, making her Frank's biological granddaughter. We have medical evaluations from 3 separate physicians confirming Frank's mental competence in the year before his death. We have the original will with its codicil detailing specific conditions for inheritance that demonstrate Frank's clear thinking and forward planning. He presented the threatening letters from Griggs, the development proposal, the investor list. Most significantly, we can prove Mr. Griggs has been targeting this property for years through intimidation and manipulation. He threatened Mr. Thorne. He burned Mr. Thorne's barn. He stole pages from the will to prevent Miss Marlowe from understanding her grandfather's requirements. This isn't a good faith dispute about mental capacity. This is a predatory developer using the court system to steal land he's already promised to investors. Judge Brennan studied the documents with the slow thoroughness of someone who'd learned to spot deception. She looked up at Griggs, who sat stone-faced beside his lawyers. Mr. Griggs, did you remove pages from the will filed with the county clerk? Griggs's lead attorney jumped in. Your Honor, my client exercised his court-granted authority as caretaker to review estate documents. Any discrepancies in the filing are the responsibility of county administration, not— That wasn't my question. Brennan's voice cut through the excuse like winter wind. Mr. Griggs, did you personally remove pages from Franklin Thorne's will to prevent Miss Marlowe from knowing the inheritance conditions? The courtroom went silent. Griggs met the judge's eyes, calculating whether lying under oath was worth the risk. The will was unnecessarily complex. I simplified what the court needed to see. You simplified it. Brennan leaned back in her chair. You took it upon yourself to edit a legal document filed with the court. As a non-lawyer, as someone who stood to benefit if that document's conditions weren't met. She read the codicil aloud, her voice steady, and when she reached condition 5, the one about malicious contest forfeiting, claims, her eyebrow raised slightly. Convenient that this particular clause went missing. She looked at Griggs, almost like someone didn't want it seen. Chen was on his feet. Your Honor, this is speculation. There's no proof. The proof is in the timing and the theft. Brennan's patience had clearly run out. Mr. Griggs had exclusive access to these documents as court-appointed caretaker. Pages went missing that would have prevented him from profiting through this lawsuit. That's not speculation. That's evidence. She turned to Rowan. Miss Marlowe, stand, please. Rowan stood, legs shaking, aware that her entire future was being decided in this moment. You've been residing on the property for how long? 2 weeks, Your Honor. You're aware you need to stay there for 365 consecutive days to meet your grandfather's conditions. Yes, ma'am. The house was condemned by county inspection 3 days ago. How is it you're still living there? We fixed everything they cited. Had it re-inspected by a certified inspector from the next county. Passed all codes. Brennan consulted a document. I have that report here. Remarkable turnaround for 72 hours. She looked at Fletcher in the gallery. Mr. Pritchard, you coordinated the repairs. Fletcher stood. Yes, ma'am, with help from about 30 volunteers. 30 volunteers fixed a condemned house in 3 days. Frank Thorne helped a lot of people over the years, Your Honor. They remembered. The judge nodded slowly and something shifted in her expression. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. This was a story she understood, the mountain way of paying debts and honoring memory. She was silent for a long moment, studying documents, then looked up with the finality of someone who'd made a decision. Miss Marlowe, let me be clear about something. The law doesn't care about fairness. The law cares about evidence and precedent. But every once in a while, a case comes along where the law and justice happen to align. She turned to her clerk. Enter into record the original will with complete codicil. Note that pages from said document were deliberately removed from county files by the court-appointed caretaker Keaton Griggs in violation of his fiduciary duty. Then she looked at Griggs and her voice went cold. Mr. Griggs, I'm terminating your caretaker status effective immediately. Furthermore, under the clear language of condition, viva in Mr. Thorne's codicil, your contest of this will demonstrate malicious intent based on the evidence of prior threats, arson, and document tampering. You are hereby ordered to forfeit any claim to the Thorne estate and to pay Miss Marlowe's legal fees in full. The courtroom erupted. Griggs was on his feet, his lawyers surrounding him, everyone talking at once. The reporters scrambled for their phones. Temperance let out a sound of triumph. Judge Brennan's gavel came down hard. Order, I'm not finished. The room quieted. Miss Marlowe, I'm ruling that you are the rightful heir to the Thorne estate subject to completion of the conditions specified in your grandfather's will. You have until September 15th, 2025 to meet all requirements. The county will conduct inspections to verify compliance. She gathered her papers. Additionally, I'm referring Mr. Griggs's conduct to the State Attorney General for investigation into possible criminal charges, most including fraud, arson, and obstruction of justice. This court is adjourned. Rowan stood frozen as the judge left, unable to process what had just happened. Vaughn was beside her, gripping her arm, saying something about winning, about victory. Temperance had pushed through the gallery to embrace her. Fletcher was shaking Vaughn's hand. Griggs shoved past them, all his face purple with rage, his lawyers trailing behind. At the door, he turned back, and for just a moment, his eyes locked with Rowan's. She saw hatred there, and humiliation, and the promise of a man who didn't forgive being beaten. Then he was gone, and the courtroom dissolved into celebration. That evening, Rowan stood on the porch of Thorne House, Wren beside her, watching the sun set over mountains that were somehow impossibly hers. The house glowed with electric light behind them. Smoke rose from the chimney. Wren leaned against her, small and warm and permanent. We get to stay. Yeah, Bird, we get to stay. Forever. Forever was a long time. Forever was 350 more days and a growing season, and proving she could be what Frank had believed she could be. Forever was learning to farm and reading a dead mother's words and making a home out of stone and grief and stubborn refusal to quit. But looking at this land, at this house, at the daughter who'd never known stability until now, Rowan thought maybe she could learn to believe in forever. Yeah, Bird, forever.